Hey everybody, big day in the Nikon world. The launch of the Z8 was at 5 a.m. this morning. I put my pre-order in for one. I'll be doing a complete rundown of its menu structure and setting it up. It really is a miniature Z9. I don't have one in my hands yet. I expect I'll have one by the end of the month or really early next month. But it really is a scaled down version of the Z9 with essentially all the same capabilities. So I thought I'd put this short little video out just to talk about what this camera is, what it isn't, who it might be great for, who might not need it. Spoiler alert, those with the Z9, you probably don't need this unless you have unlimited resources and or you're a working professional that absolutely needs a backup body. I don't feel like I'm going to need both the Z8 and the Z9, and I'm not sure which I'm going to keep. I'm going to make that determination after I shoot with it for a few weeks. But I think it's interesting, it really truly is kind of the camera I was hoping the Z9 would be when the Z9 came out. You can find videos of me at the Z9 launch talking about how, wow, I don't really want this big a camera, this heavy a camera. When I first got it in my hand, I said, ooh, this is big and heavy. In the wake of that, however, I've gotten really used to the feel of this camera. I adore it, and I really like working with it with the new long lenses like my 800 PF that Nikon's produced, which are hand-holdable. They have these incredible new tele lenses like the 400 2.8 with the teleconverter and the 600 with the teleconverter and the 800 PF that I use, where the weight is light, they're back weighted, and you can hand-hold those lenses, but you wouldn't want to hand-hold them like this. It's nice to have the vertical grip to keep both elbows in on your body supporting that camera. So the Z8's going to have an available vertical grip. I'm going to put links to the Z8 and its vertical grip and some accessories I think that people moving from DSLR to the Z camera system for the first time should consider in this video's full description if you click the title or show more. And I'll also have those up top, front, and center over on my ATS links page. You can always just click right there or go over to hudsonhenry.com/ATS links. Those links help me out. So let's jump into this. What is the biggest difference between the Z8 and the Z9 aside from the fact that it's $1,500 cheaper and 30% smaller and lighter? It doesn't have that vertical grip. You can buy the new vertical grip accessory for it, which holds two ENEL15 batteries, so it'll increase its battery life. One thing you lose moving from the Z9 to it is that big, huge professional grade battery that the Z9 packs in underneath it, which I have yet to completely exhaust in a day, even shooting thousands of frames of wildlife. Putting the vertical grip to do wildlife work with a longer lens like the 100 to 400 or those bigger primes allows you to stick two batteries in there and more properly emulate the battery life of this big battery. I would take all of the battery life ratings that you see for all modern cameras with this just tremendous grain of salt, because they all get rated in the hundreds, and yet somehow I managed to get thousands of frames from a single battery in this camera. So I would expect that the Z8 will be good with battery life just like the Z9, the Z6 II, the Z7 II. The other big difference is it has two USB-C ports in the side of it when you open up its flap. The Z9, the Z6, the Z7 II, the Z50, they all have a single USB port. Z6, Z7 II are USB-C, the Z9's USB-C, Z50's getting a little longer in the tooth. But people say, well, why did they add a second USB-C port? Well, that's for running accessories at the same time that you're using external power, which can come from a power delivery capable battery brick. I'm going to put a link to that battery brick in with the accessories I think you should consider, because it's really nice, particularly doing night shoots, and these cameras are amazing for night work, to just plug in a USB-C battery brick and keep your battery topped off as you're working. It's been a frustration to me that plugging in an external battery brick blocks me from using USB-C accessories like Unleashed's Fullography, which is really nice for unlimited exposures and bulb ramping and some other things like that. I think it's extremely important for video shooters. These cameras both have unreal raw 8K capabilities for video and 10-bit internal 4K that's so rich and nice, and nearly unlimited recording time limits. You know, they're just a fantastic video camera that really takes Nikon's video recording up a notch, both the Z9 and the Z8. Nikon released this accessory grip for video shooters that you can clamp to your fluid head's control arm, and you can have the function buttons of your camera and focus controls and menu and all that right on the tip of your finger as you're doing really smooth video motions, but it plugs in via USB-C. So when you're running video, you really want external power because video eats power, and it made this kind of useless because you had to run off the battery if you're going to use this because it used up the power delivery port on the camera. So now having two of those lets you run this video accessory, which is going to be a big deal for video shooters. The other thing it has that's different than the Z9, I mean, it has the same sensor, the same image processor, the same frame rates, all those same modes like shooting, 120 frame per second burst JPEGs or shooting pre-roll bursts where if you're holding the shutter half down and then you hit the button, it'll record for a second or 2 seconds before you ever hit the shutter. It'll save those images. It was actually recording them and overwriting them until you actually hit the button. So you can get that moment when the snake's tongue comes out, and instead of shooting it right after it came out, you're recording before you actually shot. There's some cool things like that. The baseball hitting the bat, that moment of action that you can't quite predict and you're waiting for. If you're just a second late, you can still capture it because you were capturing it before. It's got all that stuff that the Z9 has. The bulletproof weather sealing. It's essentially a Z9 scaled down into a smaller body. The only real mode change, aside from the USB-C interface change that I've seen, is the fact that it has a dedicated airplane tracking mode. So you've got humans, which looks for eyes, then faces if they're further away, then torsos if they're further away than that, then the person if they're further away than that. Animals, which does the same thing with animals. Vehicles, which looks for cars, boats, airplanes, motorcycles, trains. Now they've added, planes on their own as a separate entity for those people who love to shoot air shows and planes in flight. I found the vehicle mode worked great for planes, but this is supposedly somewhat improved. I would expect, knowing Nikon's track record of being amazing with firmware and bringing features from new cameras to older cameras that can accept it, that your Z9, being the same exact camera, essentially, will get that airplane tracking mode via a firmware update. The reaction to this Z8 launch that I'm seeing in my flooded inbox, whether it's on YouTube or in my email or in the WhatsApp groups that we keep live for all the workshops that we run, runs the gamut from, wow, I'm super disappointed, there's nothing new in this, it's just like my Z9, to, oh my gosh, this is the camera I've been waiting for. Finally, I get the Z9 tech in a smaller system that's not quite as expensive. I think that second reaction is really, really warranted. This is Nikon bringing all the technology of the Z9 down into a little bit more affordable package that doesn't take as much space and weight in your bag. And for those people who are still shooting with the original Z6 and Z7 and were maybe waiting for that upgrade, the Z7 II, the Z6 II weren't quite enough for them. Even for some Z6 II, Z7 II shooters that really want that enhanced low light shooting mode, the starlight view that lets you see the landscape and star field when you're doing Milky Way photography. You can actually see the horizon and the star field when you're composing. The red warm color view so that you don't burn your night vision out looking through the viewfinder or at the back LCD. The unbelievable low light focusing capabilities that the Z8 and the Z9 bring to the game, where you can actually focus and pinpoint AFS on a star, not just a planet, but a star. It's pretty darn incredible. The animal eye detection improvements with the Z9 over the Z6 II and Z7 II, mind-bending. And also the lack of blackout. It has dual video feeds coming from that sensor, one into the viewfinder, one into the memory card as it's shooting images. So there's no interruption in your video display. You just see a little flashing symbol. You have several choices as to what you'll see when you're recording images. I just have a little flash. I don't even have a shutter speed. People pick up my camera to take a picture and they're like, oh, it didn't work. I said, oh, you just took 34 frames. So I think that for anyone coming from one of the older Z cameras that's not a Z9, this is a significant upgrade. It's not cheap, but the Z9 was surprisingly affordable for what it is as a flagship pro build, dual grip, tons and tons of customizable buttons, everything that you had in a D6 brought to the Z format, coming in at $5,500 was surprising. Most people expected it to be closer to $7,000, and a lot of the other brands priced that way. Putting all of that technology in a beautifully weather-sealed smaller body with even some enhancements to it and making it $1,500 less, that's pretty cool. If you want the vertical grip, you add a $250 accessory, which I'll also link in this video's full description. And that's really nice for when you're shooting with that really long lens and you want to keep both elbows braced to your body. You know, I find myself, if I didn't have that now shooting with a long lens, I would really miss it. So for me, I'm gonna get the Z8. I've already ordered it. I ordered it at like 5:01 a.m. through MPS, so I should have one of the very first ones to hit the market. I'll let you know what I think of it when I get it. I also ordered the vertical grip. I hope that comes quickly because I have a hard time shooting my 800 without that vertical grip now that I'm so used to it. It only has one CF Express B card slot and one SD card slot. Some people are gonna love that, some people are gonna hate it. If you like to shoot to both cards at the same time, if you're super, anal about making sure that you've got everything backed up at the second that you shoot, it's gonna slow your shooting down, shooting to an SD card at the same time as you're shooting to a CF Express B card. You're gonna wind up with a much smaller number of frames that you can fire in the lossless raw compression. It'll be noticeable because the SD card writes so much slower. For me, it's not a big deal. I like to shoot video to one card and stills to the other card, with the video card being my spillover. But with the 650 gigabyte card, I never fill it up. I call in camera when I'm shooting burst sequences. I've got videos about that. I just think more cards is your answer. Shooting to just the CF Express B and recognizing that those cards just really never fail. And you can trust it till you get it off the card and backed up, which should be the same day. It looks like the controls are almost identical to the Z9, so for people, coming from the Z9 to it, it's gonna feel the same. If you have scads of money or you're shooting professionally and you're paying for your gear, no problem with your work, it's the perfect backup camera because everything's gonna feel nearly identical. For those of you coming from the Z6, Z7, the play button is now down here on the right, which is really handy. In the DSLR days, it didn't matter because you needed to look down at the screen to look at your images. When you're shooting through a mirrorless, you get to look at them through your diopter adjusted viewfinder, and not having to take your hand off the long lens to hit play is a really great thing. You want it on that right thumb so that you can just keep shooting, boop, 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 preview. You don't have to come back and hit that button on the top like they used to be. It's a sensible choice to move it from the DSLR days. Who is this camera for? I think, as I said, it's for anybody coming from a Z6, Z7, and maybe some people from the Z7 II and Z6 II that really want a faster handling camera. Miss some of those things from the D850, like the backlit buttons and the just feel of it and size and heft. Not to mention just, the D850 was a do-it-all workhorse of a camera. This Z8 is a do-it-all workhorse of a camera that carries a little bit smaller than the Z9, which is the same do-it-all workhorse camera. I think if you're still shooting with a D850 and a D500, if I can possibly convince you to try this camera out, you're gonna be really, really pleased. But you have to recognize that it's a different, and I would argue better, experience. There's nothing wrong with the D850 or the D500. They're incredible cameras. I captured thousands of frames that I love with those cameras, but the minute I started working with Nikon's electronic viewfinder, I realized I loved it. It was better than the Sonys that I had worked with at that time. Sony's come a long ways and they're making incredible mirrorless cameras now too. It was certainly better than the Panasonic mirrorless I dabbled with way back in the early 20-teens. The difference for me is the ability to look through a diopter adjusted viewfinder, zoom into 100% and see while I'm shooting, is my focus perfect when I'm working in the landscape. The ability to track eyes and faces and have it be automated, or whether it be animal or human. The ability to work in low light and not have my view dim to where it's difficult to see through the optical viewfinder. The ability with the Z9 and the new Z8 to see a starlit landscape and compose instead of just doing it by braille and taking a 30-second shot and looking to see, well, is that the right composition I want? No, I need to adjust a little to the right. How much? No, I can see it in starlight view on the tripod through this with a fast lens. It's crazy. the ability to focus on a star instead of, you know, going out and focusing on infinity with your given lens and putting tape marks on it. These lenses don't focus that way anyway. You can't put a tape mark, but they nail stars, you know, in Milky Way situations, the Z8 and the Z9. The Z6 and Z7 have no problem focusing on bright planets in Milky Way shooting situations, or a distant barn light. You can see them and focus on them with that pinpoint autofocus. And the autofocus is just way more accurate in the Z world. I haven't even started talking about lenses and how much better this big giant mount that they have for the Z system is than the smaller F mount was in the days of the DSLR. Much, much smaller back opening on your lens bayonet mount. It lets the optical engineers do wild things with their lens design. I mean, I had loved my old 14-24 f-mount lens for years. The new 14-24 blows its doors clean off, just blows them off. The new 105 2.8 macro lens, shockingly good. All the 1.8 prime lenses are astounding. The 100-400 is so sharp at every single focal length and aperture. I've given up on the 70-200. It's so good. I just basically carry this 24-120 f4, this 14-24 2.8, and the 100-400 f4. That's my choice of lenses. And I'm not someone who automatically upgrades whenever the newest and latest thing comes out. I still love my 105mm 1.4 macro on the f-mount. I got a video launching tomorrow that explains that I'm sending the new 85 1.2S back. As amazing as a lens as it is, I don't find it that much better than the old 105 1.4, especially now that this lens gets in-body image stabilization with the Z camera body. And, you know, it works just as well with eye detect autofocus as the other Z-mount lenses through this new system. It just makes it an incredibly better lens than it was on f-mount. There's a lot of advantages to the mirrorless system if you're open to it. Just know you're going to get rid of dynamic area autofocus. That's what you lived in with your DSLR. That's what I lived in for decades. Now you're going to want to use 3D tracking and wide area with eye detect enabled, or animal eye detect enabled, or vehicle detection enabled, and you're going to let the modern technology and artificial machine intelligence / machine learning do a lot of that heavy lifting and keeping your subject in perfect focus, and you're going to find that a lot more of your images are in perfect focus. So, you know, I think if you're still shooting with the DSLR, get an FTZ2 adapter, get a Z8, and I would predict that if you do a little homework on learning how to use it and experiment with those focus modes, you won't find yourself shooting with those older bodies very much longer. And then when you start trying the new Nikon Z glass, you won't be using the old f-mount lenses very much longer either, or at least very few of them. I can't quite give up my 105 1.4, but I'll bet when they come out with a Z-mount one someday, I will. All right, so again, I got links to all this stuff up in my video's full description. Just click on the title or show more. It's over on my website, hudsonhenry.com/ATS-links. You just run over there and I keep all of the gear that I use and swear by updated there. I'll let you know what I think when I get this camera in my hands. It's not as exciting for me because I have the Z9 as it might be for you that don't. I think for those of you who don't, this is a really exciting opportunity to get the just most groundbreaking tech out there in your hands in a smaller package at a cheaper price.